Rain falls over Wayne Manor. It falls the way it always does on nights like this, softly at first, then steadily, filling the silence between thunderclaps with a sound like breathing. Batman finishes his patrol. He glides down through the mist above Gotham, past rooftops slick with water, past neon signs blurred into halos of color, until the city disappears behind him and only the cave remains. The waterfall greets him first, that low, endless rush of water falling into darkness, a sound so constant that Bruce Wayne has long stopped noticing it consciously. It simply lives inside the cave, the way his own heartbeat lives inside his chest. Tonight, he does not walk toward the Batcomputer. He does not remove his cowl at the workstation, as he usually does, the cortex of the cave humming with monitors and case files glowing blue against the stone walls. Instead, he turns, past the trophy cases, past the giant penny, past the mounted case of the Joker's playing cards, kept behind glass like a warning rather than a prize. He walks toward the far wall of the cave, where the shells of old case files grow thicker with dust, where the light from the monitors no longer reaches, where the cave narrows into shadow. There is a door here. Most people who have stood in this cave, and there have been very few, never notice it. It is built into the rock itself, disguised by a shelf of decoy files, a door with no handle, no keypad, nothing but a small brass keyhole, worn smooth by decades of a single key. Bruce reaches into his belt and removes that key now. It is an old key, older than most of his gadgets, older even than the cowl he wears. He has had it since he was a very young man, since long before there was a Batcave at all, only a cellar, and a boy, and a promise. The door opens with a heavy, patient sound, like the cave itself exhaling. Inside, the air is different, cooler, drier. It smells of old paper and dust, and the particular staleness of rooms that are rarely opened. A single overhead light flickers on, not electric, but gaslit, deliberately old-fashioned, the way Bruce prefers it in here. The flame catches slowly, casting long amber shadows across shelf after shelf of forgotten things. Case files with no closing report. Evidence bags sealed but never logged into any court record, because no court ever heard these cases. Photographs curling at the edges. Newspaper clippings yellowed to the color of weak tea. Maps of Gotham covered in a lifetime of handwritten notes. Arrows pointing to places that led nowhere. Red string connecting ideas that were never proven. Old magnifying glasses rest on two different wooden desks, their brass handles tarnished from handling. Dust floats gently through the gaslight, disturbed by the opening door, drifting like something suspended in amber. Batman calls this the room of unanswered questions. He has never told anyone its full contents, not Alfred, not Dick, not even the small circle of allies who know most of his secrets. A few of them know the room exists. None of them know what is inside it. And none of them have asked to know, because somehow, without ever saying so, they understand that this room is different from the rest of the cave. The rest of the cave is a museum of victories. This room is something else entirely. On the far wall, above the tallest shelf, hangs a small brass plaque, tarnished like everything else in the room, engraved in Bruce's own handwriting from decades ago. Every unanswered question makes the next answer possible. Tonight, Bruce does not come here to review a case. He does not come here searching for a clue he missed, or a connection he failed to make. Gotham is quiet tonight, as quiet as Gotham ever becomes. And for the first time in a long while, Bruce Wayne has nowhere else he needs to be. So he does something he almost never allows himself to do. He remembers. Not the cases he solved, not the villains he caught, the plots he unraveled, the puzzles the world called impossible until he made them simple. He is here for something quieter than that. He wants to remember what these cases taught him. Not the answers he found, but the parts of his mind those answers built, one mystery at a time, until a frightened boy with a magnifying glass became the world's greatest detective. Bruce removes his cowl. He sets it gently on the nearest desk, beside a stack of forgotten notebooks, and for a moment he simply stands there. Bruce Wayne, not Batman, in the amber light, listening to the distant waterfall through the stone walls. Then he takes a slow breath and begins to walk. The first cabinet is waiting. The first cabinet Bruce opens is small, unremarkable, tucked into the corner nearest the door, as if he placed it there deliberately, so it would be the first thing he saw every time he entered this room. Perhaps he did. He can no longer remember. Memory, he has learned, edits itself the way a detective edits a case file, keeping what matters, discarding what seems irrelevant, even when it isn't. Inside the cabinet is a single file, thin and old, its edges softened by handling. The label reads only a case number, no name. Bruce doesn't need a name to remember it. This was one of his earliest cases as Batman, barely a year into the mask, when he still believed, in some quiet corner of himself, that intelligence meant already knowing the answer. A string of burglaries across the Diamond District. Every scene identical, every method precise. A thief who left behind no fingerprints, no footage, no witnesses, only a signature detail each time. A single white glove, folded neatly and left behind, as if daring anyone to follow the trail. Young Bruce, barely Batman at all, still learning the weight of the cowl, believed he understood the pattern almost immediately. He remembers the confidence he felt, the clean, satisfying click of a theory falling into place. He was certain the thief was a disgraced jewel appraiser named Foster Kane, a man with motive, opportunity, and a documented grudge against every store that had been robbed. Bruce built his entire case around that certainty. He staked out Kane's apartment for 6 nights. He intercepted a shipment Kane was supposedly meant to steal. He even confronted the man directly, cowl and cape and all, absolutely convinced the mystery would end that night with a confession. It did not end that night. Kane wasn't the thief. Kane had never been the thief. He was, in fact, an innocent man trying to rebuild his reputation after being wrongfully blamed for an unrelated fraud years earlier. And Batman's investigation, his stakeouts, his confrontation, had very nearly destroyed what little credibility Kane had left to salvage. The real thief was never caught. Not that year, not the year after. The white gloves stopped appearing eventually, the case grew cold, and it remains, to this day, unsolved, sealed inside this file, sealed inside this cabinet, sealed inside a section of Bruce's memory he visits more often than he admits. Bruce sits now at the small desk beside the cabinet, the file open under the gaslight, and allows himself to feel what he felt then. Not the shame of failure. He has long since made peace with that feeling. Something more specific. The particular shame of having been satisfied with an answer before earning it. He had wanted to be right so badly that he stopped asking whether he was. That, Bruce understands now, was the true lesson of this case. Not the identity of a thief he never found, but the shape of a mistake he would spend the rest of his life training himself never to repeat. He remembers the exact moment the realization crystallized. Standing in Kane's ransacked apartment, watching the man's hands shake as he tried to explain himself to a masked stranger twice his size. Bruce felt something shift inside him. Not guilt exactly, but recognition. He had done to Kane exactly what Gotham's police force did to half its population. Assumed the answer before gathering the evidence, then bent the evidence to fit the answer. From that night forward, Bruce built a new rule into the foundation of his methodology, one he has never broken since. The moment a theory feels comfortable, question it twice as hard. Certainty, he learned, is not the reward of good detective work. It is often the enemy of it. He closes the file gently, the way one might close a door on an old room in a house. Not to forget what happened there, but to make peace with it, and let it remain part of the structure holding everything else up. He returns the case to the cabinet exactly as he found it. Some mysteries, he has come to believe, are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried. Small stones in the pocket, reminders of the weight that comes before wisdom. Bruce rises from the desk and walks deeper into the room. The next shelf holds no case file at all, only a row of old training journals, their leather covers cracked from decades in dry cave air. Bruce runs his fingers along their spines before selecting one from near the middle, a thin volume dated to his years abroad when he was not yet Batman, not yet even fully Bruce Wayne in his own mind, only a young man traveling the world, searching for teachers willing to shape him into something new. He remembers a monastery in the mountains outside a small village whose name he still keeps private, even from himself, out of respect for the people who sheltered him there. His teacher was an old woman named Kirigi, a former investigator for a regional court, long since retired, who agreed to train him only after making him wait 3 months outside her door, proving through patience alone that he was serious. Her first lesson had nothing to do with fighting or chemistry or forensics. Her first lesson was about looking. She would walk him through the village marketplace and stop without warning. "Tell me what you saw," she would say. And Bruce, brilliant, restless, 21 years old and certain of his own sharpness, would describe the obvious things. The merchant selling fruit, the child chasing a dog, the old man arguing over the price of rice. Kirigi would shake her head slowly every time. "You saw what you expected to see," she told him once, sitting on a low stone wall as the sun set behind the terraced hills. "You did not see what was actually there." She taught him to notice the merchant's left hand trembling slightly as he counted his coins, not from age, but from fear of someone standing behind Bruce, someone Bruce had never even turned to look at. She taught him to notice the child was not laughing as she chased the dog, but crying, and that no one around her seemed to care, which told him more about that village than any official record ever could. "People believe what they expect," Kirigi told him. "Judgment happens first, in half a second, before your eyes even finish gathering information. The mind fills gaps with assumption faster than the eyes can fill them with truth. You must learn to hold your judgment still, like a held breath, until you have gathered everything there is to gather." Bruce practiced this discipline obsessively over the following months. He would sit in crowded tea houses and force himself to notice 50 details before allowing himself a single conclusion about anyone in the room. He trained his mind the way one might train an aching muscle, slowly, deliberately, accepting the discomfort of unfamiliar use. It became, in time, the foundation of everything he would later call detective work. Years afterward, standing over a crime scene in Gotham for the first time as Batman, Bruce found himself doing exactly what Kirigi had trained into him, resisting the instinct to conclude, forcing himself instead to simply see. The overturned chair that everyone assumed indicated a struggle, but whose scuff marks proved it had been placed there deliberately. The broken window glass that fell outward, not inward, revealing the crime scene had been staged to look like a break-in rather than what it actually was, an inside job. None of the detectives working the case noticed these details, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they had already decided what story the scene was telling before they finished looking at it. Bruce closes the journal now, the pages soft with age, and allows himself a small, private smile, the kind he rarely shows anyone, even Alfred. Kirigi passed away many years ago. He never told her what she had made possible. He suspects, somehow, that she already knew. He sets the journal carefully back on the shelf, in the exact space it occupied before, the way he has learned to return everything in this world, with respect for the order it once had, and gratitude for what it taught him before it changed. As he turns to walk deeper into the room, his eyes catch, just for a moment, a small wooden drawer built into the base of the farthest shelf. No label, no visible lock mechanism beyond a small brass keyhole worn in a way that suggests it has been touched more than it has been opened. Bruce's gaze lingers there for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looks away and continues walking, the way he always does. Deeper in the room, tucked between 2 evidence boxes marked only with a Justice League clearance code, sits a manila folder far thicker than the others, nearly bursting with printouts, financial records, and photographs of a man in an immaculate business suit, smiling for cameras with the practiced warmth of someone who has never once told the truth by accident. Bruce lifts the folder with both hands, feeling its weight settle familiarly against his palms. Lex Luthor. There are few minds in the world Bruce respects as dangerously as his own, and fewer still that have come as close to defeating him. The case inside this folder was never made public, not even within the League. It involved a shell corporation Luthor had built across 17 countries, funneling resources toward a project that, on paper, appeared to be nothing more than clean energy research. Superman had cleared it. The United Nations had cleared it. Every metric of investigation available to modern intelligence agencies had cleared it. Batman had not. He remembers the frustration of those early weeks, poring over documents that were, by every objective measure, flawless. Luthor had not made a single traceable mistake, no falsified signature, no inconsistent timestamp, no financial gap large enough to raise alarm in even the most rigorous audit. For the first time in years, Bruce found himself doubting his own instincts. Maybe, he allowed himself to think, one exhausted night in the cave, surrounded by 17 countries' worth of shell company paperwork, maybe this time there is nothing to find. It was Alfred who reminded him, gently as always, of something Bruce had once told him years earlier, and apparently needed to hear returned to him now. "You've always said, Master Bruce, that the truth doesn't hide in the documents. It hides in the people who wrote them." Bruce set down the paperwork that night and did something he rarely allowed himself the patience to do early in an investigation. He stopped studying the evidence and started studying Luthor himself. Not his crimes, not his patterns of fraud, his psychology. Bruce spent the following 2 weeks reviewing every recorded interview Luthor had ever given, hundreds of hours of footage spanning 3 decades, not for information, for behavior. The way Luthor's hands moved when discussing his own accomplishments versus discussing Superman's. The particular tightness around his eyes whenever a reporter used the word alien. The subtle, almost imperceptible way his vocabulary shifted from confident to defensive whenever anyone suggested he might not be the smartest man in any given room. A pattern began to emerge, not of criminal behavior, but of motivation. Luthor's entire empire, Bruce realized, was not built around power for its own sake. It was built around proving something. An endless, insatiable need to demonstrate that human intelligence could outmatch anything the universe placed in front of it, including, especially, a man who could fly. That insight changed everything. If Luthor's driving motivation was proving superiority rather than accumulating wealth or power directly, then the 17-country energy project wasn't really about clean energy at all. It was about legacy. It was about being remembered as the man who solved what Superman could not. Bruce went back through the financial records with fresh eyes, not looking for fraud, but looking for ego. And there, buried in a research subsidiary that had nothing to do with energy at all, He found it. A private laboratory researching Kryptonian solar radiation absorption, disguised inside patent filings for solar panel technology. Luthor wasn't building clean energy. He was building a weapon disguised as a gift to humanity, one that would let him personally neutralize Superman while appearing, publicly, to have saved the planet. Bruce brought the evidence to the League, not as a triumphant accusation, but as a quiet, carefully constructed case built entirely on inference and behavioral pattern, because the paperwork alone would never have convicted Luthor of anything. It was Bruce's understanding of the man, not the money, that unraveled the plan in time. He remembers what Superman said to him afterward, standing on the watchtower observation deck, looking down at the curve of the Earth. "How did you see what none of us could?" Bruce answered honestly, without pride. "I didn't outthink him, Clark. I didn't need to. He's smarter than me in 100 ways I'll never match. But intelligence like his always needs an audience. I just had to figure out who he was really trying to impress." Superman was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Bruce has never forgotten. "Maybe that's the difference between you two. He wants to be remembered as the smartest man who ever lived. You just want to understand the puzzle in front of you." Bruce sets the folder back into its place on the shelf now, the memory settling into him like sediment at the bottom of still water. He did not win that case because he out-invented Lex Luthor. He won because he understood, more clearly than Luthor himself perhaps understood, exactly what Luthor was afraid of. Understanding people, Bruce reflects quietly, has always mattered more than understanding machines. He continues on, deeper into the room. Near the center of the room, a small evidence case rests atop a rolling cart Bruce built himself decades ago. Practical, unglamorous, exactly the kind of tool nobody notices until they need it. Inside the case is a single object, a cracked communicator badge bearing the emblem of the Justice League, its edges scorched black. Bruce lifts it carefully, turning it over in his gloved hands. This case had nothing to do with a villain at all. It began with something small, a malfunction in the Javelin's navigation system during a routine patrol near the edge of the solar system. Superman dismissed it as a sensor glitch. Wonder Woman suspected sabotage. Flash ran full diagnostics twice and found nothing conclusive. The League's combined expertise in physics, alien technology and engineering came up entirely empty. Bruce sat quietly through 3 separate briefings on the subject, saying almost nothing. It wasn't until the 4th meeting, listening to Jean describe the exact sequence of events leading up to the malfunction, that Bruce asked a single question. A question so simple that several League members later admitted feeling embarrassed no one had thought to ask it first. What time of day did it happen? Not Earth time, local ship time, relative to when the crew last slept. The room went quiet. No one had cross-referenced the malfunction against crew fatigue, because the assumption from the beginning had been mechanical or technological failure, something worthy of a team composed of a Kryptonian, an Amazon, a Martian, and the fastest man alive. But Bruce wasn't thinking about circuitry. He was thinking about human error. It turned out the malfunction wasn't a malfunction at all. It was a subtle miscalibration made by a fatigued crew member during a routine software update. An honest, forgivable mistake made by someone who had been awake for nearly 31 hours straight, covering for another member's medical leave. The system hadn't failed. A tired person had made a tiny, human miscalculation, and the ship's advanced technology had simply carried that error forward with mechanical precision. Bruce remembers the quiet in the room after the truth became clear. Not embarrassment exactly, but a kind of humbled recognition, shared silently among some of the most powerful beings on Earth. Diana was the one who finally spoke. "We were looking for something extraordinary," she said. "You looked for something ordinary." Bruce has thought about that moment often in the years since. The League possessed strength beyond anything he could ever hope to match. Flight, speed, unbreakable skin, minds that processed information at speeds his own brain could never approach. But strength like that, he has come to believe, can sometimes become its own kind of blind spot. When you are extraordinary, it becomes natural to assume the answer to any problem must be extraordinary too. Bruce, lacking any of their abilities, had never been permitted that assumption. He had spent his entire life solving problems using nothing but attention, patience, and a refusal to dismiss the mundane. Where the League searched the skies for their answer, Bruce searched the exhausted, ordinary human being sitting quietly at the console. Because, in his experience, that is so often where the truth is actually hiding. He sets the cracked badge back into its case gently, almost reverently. Extraordinary minds, he reflects, sometimes overlook the ordinary explanation precisely because it seems too simple for people capable of the impossible. Bruce has never needed the impossible. He has only ever needed to ask the next question no one else thought to ask. He closes the case and moves on. Further along the shelf, Bruce finds a row of small notebooks bound in worn leather, each labeled only with a date rather than a case name. He selects one from many years ago and opens it beneath the gaslight. The pages filled with cramped handwriting, small sketches of faces, arrows connecting phrases like hesitation before answer and avoided eye contact on second question. This notebook belongs to a period in his life when Bruce was refining something he considers one of his most essential and least discussed skills. Not forensic analysis, not chemistry or engineering or the countless technical disciplines people associate with the world's greatest detective. Interrogation. Or, more precisely, listening. Bruce remembers a case involving a kidnapping in Gotham's East End. A young girl taken from her family under circumstances that left almost no physical evidence behind. No fingerprints, no fibers, no footage. The only lead was the girl's uncle, a nervous, soft-spoken man who insisted over and over that he had no idea where she might be. The police believed him. His alibi checked out. His emotional distress seemed genuine. Bruce sat across from him anyway, in a quiet room lit only by a single lamp, and simply listened. Not to the words, but to everything surrounding them. He noticed the uncle's hands remained perfectly still whenever he discussed his own alibi. Steady, practiced, rehearsed. But the moment Bruce mentioned the girl's favorite stuffed rabbit by name, something he had learned from her mother earlier that day, the man's hands trembled, just slightly, before he caught himself. A lie rehearsed sounds smooth. Grief, when it's real, is never smooth. And guilt, disguised as grief, moves differently than either. Bruce asked no further questions about the alibi. He asked instead, gently, almost kindly, "Does she still sleep with the rabbit every night?" The man's composure did not break immediately, but his silence lasted 4 seconds too long, an eternity in the language of human hesitation. And in that silence, Bruce understood. The uncle was not the kidnapper, but he knew who was. It took another hour of patient, careful conversation. Not interrogation, not intimidation, simply attentive listening, to learn that the uncle had unknowingly provided information to an associate he trusted, a man involved in the girl's disappearance without the uncle ever realizing his own words had made it possible. The girl was found safely 11 hours later. Bruce closes the notebook now, remembering the particular quality of that silence. The 4 seconds that told him more than any piece of physical evidence could have. He has often told his allies, when they ask how he seems to know things he shouldn't be able to know, that every conversation is itself a crime scene. Every hesitation is a footprint. Every unconsciously chosen word is a fingerprint left behind by the mind that spoke it. People believe they can control what they say. Far fewer understand how much they reveal in how they say it. The pause before an answer, the specific words avoided, the questions people are strangely eager to answer versus the ones they quietly change the subject away from. Alfred once told him, half joking, that Bruce interrogates conversations at the dinner table the same way he interrogates suspects in the interrogation room, noticing things Alfred himself doesn't realize he's revealing. Bruce had laughed, quietly, and admitted it was probably true. He returns the notebook to its shelf and allows himself a moment of stillness in the gaslight, listening to the distant, patient rush of the waterfall beyond the stone walls. Every silence, he thinks, contains an answer. You simply have to be willing to wait long enough to hear it. The next section of shelving holds what might be the largest collection in the entire room. Dozens upon dozens of notebooks, sketches, timelines drawn and redrawn, theories crossed out with thick black lines, entire pages devoted to ideas Bruce eventually discarded as wrong. He runs his hands slowly along the spines, feeling the particular texture of paper that has aged inside a cave for years. Most people, Bruce has come to understand, assume a great detective's mind works like a perfectly organized machine, clean deductions arriving fully formed, answers appearing the moment enough clues are gathered. The truth, held here on these shelves, is far messier. For every case he has ever solved, Bruce has generated dozens of wrong theories first. Entire timelines built on assumptions later proven false. Suspects investigated for weeks only to be cleared entirely. Chemical analyses run 3, 4, 5 times because the first 4 results didn't match the story he expected them to tell. He pulls one notebook from the case involving the Riddler's elaborate scheme years ago, a case the public remembers as one of Batman's cleanest victories, solved with apparent effortless brilliance in under 72 hours. The notebook tells a very different story. Page after page shows theories built and dismantled. An entire section devoted to a suspect who turned out to have no connection to the case whatsoever. A timeline painstakingly reconstructed that Bruce eventually realized was built on a witness's honest but mistaken memory of what time she had actually seen the getaway vehicle. Nearly 40 pages of wrong answers exist in this single notebook before the correct solution finally appears, scrawled almost anticlimactically in the margin of a page otherwise devoted to an unrelated dead end. Bruce remembers exactly how it felt to find that answer. Not triumphant, not electric, but quiet. Almost embarrassed in a strange way that it had taken so long to see something that, in hindsight, seemed obvious. This is why Bruce writes everything down. Not the answers, but the wrong answers most of all. Every discarded theory teaches him something about the shape of his own thinking. Every crossed-out timeline reveals an assumption he didn't realize he was making until the evidence proved it false. He has told very few people this, but he considers his failed theories more valuable in the long run than his correct ones. A correct answer tells you that you were right. A wrong answer tells you why you were wrong, and that knowledge sharpens every investigation that follows. He remembers once trying to explain this to Tim years ago, when Tim was still new to detective work and frustrated after spending 3 days chasing a lead that ultimately went nowhere. "I wasted 3 days," Tim had said, clearly disappointed in himself. Bruce had shaken his head. You didn't waste them. You eliminated a possibility. That's not nothing. That's the work. Tim hadn't fully believed him at the time. Bruce suspects he understands it better now. He closes the notebook and returns it carefully to its place among the dozens of others. A library not of triumphs, but of the long, patient, unglamorous process that makes triumph possible. Wrong answers, Bruce reflects, are simply the unfinished drafts of the truth. You cannot reach the final page without writing through all the ones that came before it. He continues walking past shelf after shelf of imperfect thinking toward the next memory waiting to be found. Near the back wall, in a small wooden box that looks almost out of place among the case files, Bruce finds something different. Not a file at all, but a photograph. Old, slightly faded, showing the kitchen of Wayne Manor exactly as it looked 20 years ago. He smiles before he even remembers why. This case never made it into any official file, because it was never really a criminal case at all. It involved a series of small thefts within Wayne Manor itself. Jewellery going missing from Bruce's late mother's collection, a few pieces at a time, spread out across several months in a pattern deliberately designed to avoid suspicion. Bruce, in his 20s at the time, freshly returned from his years of training abroad, treated it exactly like any other investigation. He reviewed staff schedules. He cross-referenced access logs. He quietly interviewed every member of the household staff, studying their behavior with the same careful attention he had learned from Kirigi years earlier. He built an elaborate theory involving a groundskeeper who had recently taken on significant gambling debts. Motive, opportunity, and a suspicious pattern of absence that seemed to align perfectly with each theft. He was preparing to confront the man that very evening when Alfred, quietly setting down a tea tray in the study, said something that stopped him entirely. "It isn't Mr. Ollis, Master Bruce." Bruce looked up, startled. "How do you know that?" Alfred, without any dramatic flourish, without any need to prove himself right, simply explained. "Because the pieces going missing aren't valuable to a thief looking for money. They're valuable to your mother's memory. A professional thief or a desperate man looking to pay off debts would take the diamond brooch first. It's worth considerably more than anything else in that collection. Instead, whoever is taking these items has taken her wedding gloves, a hair comb she wore in her wedding portrait, a small locket with your father's photograph inside. These aren't things a pawnbroker would pay well for, sir. These are things someone wants to keep." Bruce sat in stunned silence. Alfred continued gently. "I believe it's young Mrs. Alvarez in the West Wing staff quarters. Her mother passed only 4 months ago. I've noticed she often lingers in the memorial hallway longer than her duties require. I don't believe she means any harm by it, Master Bruce. I believe she's grieving and doesn't quite know how to ask for comfort." Bruce confirmed it quietly the following day, approaching the situation not as Batman, not even fully as Bruce Wayne the investigator, but simply as an employer showing compassion. Mrs. Alvarez, overwhelmed with grief and unable to afford grief counseling on her wages, had found a strange, aching comfort in holding objects that reminded her of loss and love intertwined, even objects that did not belong to her. She returned everything without complaint, in tears, and Bruce quietly arranged for her counseling to be paid for anonymously through the household budget, and made certain she never lost her position. Bruce remembers sitting with Alfred in the kitchen that night, long after the household had gone to sleep, turning the case over in his mind. "You solved it before I even started properly investigating," Bruce admitted, without any trace of the wounded pride he might have expected himself to feel. Alfred simply refilled his tea. "I didn't investigate anything, sir. I simply paid attention to what mattered to the person involved, rather than what would matter to a stranger." It was, Bruce realizes now, one of the most important lessons anyone ever taught him. More important in many ways than anything Kid Iggy taught him in that mountain village. Alfred hadn't out-detected him with forensic technique or elaborate reasoning. He had simply understood people, their grief, their needs, their quiet human contradictions, more deeply than Bruce, in his eagerness to solve the puzzle, had bothered to consider. Bruce holds the old photograph a moment longer under the gaslight. Alfred's kind, patient face barely visible in the background of the image, standing near the kitchen counter exactly as he always did. True intelligence, Bruce thinks quietly, was never about being the one who solves the mystery first. It was about remaining humble enough to be grateful when someone else does. He sets the photograph gently back in its box and continues on, carrying that warmth with him into the next aisle of shelves. Near the middle of the room stands a small, simple item that seems almost too ordinary to belong here. A folded napkin, preserved carefully in a thin protective sleeve, the watchtower's insignia printed faintly in its corner. Bruce lifts it gently, and the memory returns to him fully formed, the way certain memories do, not gradually, but all at once. It was late, watchtower late, which meant nothing since there was no true day or night aboard the station, only the eternal indifferent light of the stars outside the observation windows. Bruce had been reviewing satellite data alone in the common area when Clark entered, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, and sat across from him without asking permission, the way only a handful of people in the world ever dared to do. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence 2 old friends can share without needing to fill it. Then Clark asked a question that had clearly been sitting with him for some time. "Can I ask you something, Bruce?" Bruce nodded, still reviewing the data in front of him, only half his attention given. "You just solved a 3-month case in about 6 hours tonight. You found the mole in Star Labs before their own internal security did. Diana said you barely slept the entire time you were working it." Clark paused. "So why do you look like someone who just lost, instead of someone who just won?" Bruce set down the tablet slowly, considering the question with the same care he gave any difficult evidence. "Because solving it doesn't feel like an ending," he said finally. "It feels like the moment right before the next question." Clark frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Bruce leaned back, looking out at the stars beyond the reinforced glass. "Tonight I found out who the mole was. But now I want to know why someone with that person's background would risk everything for that amount of money. And once I know that, I'll want to know who approached them first, and how long the recruitment took, and whether there are others like them still inside Star Labs that we haven't found yet. Every answer becomes the beginning of a new question, Clark. It never actually stops." Clark was quiet for a long moment, studying Bruce with an expression somewhere between concern and genuine curiosity. "Doesn't that exhaust you? Never getting to just rest in an answer?" Bruce considered the question honestly, the way he tried to consider all of Clark's questions, even when their perspectives on the world differed as fundamentally as their abilities did. "Maybe it should," he admitted. "But I think if I ever felt fully satisfied, completely finished, I'd stop looking. And the moment I stop looking is the moment I miss something important. Gotham doesn't reward certainty, Clark. It punishes it." Clark sat with that for a long while, turning his coffee mug slowly between his hands. "You know," he said eventually, I used to think your greatest strength was how certain you always seem, how sure of yourself you look, even walking into situations that should terrify anyone. I think I had that backwards. Bruce raised an eyebrow slightly, waiting. I don't think you're ever really certain, Clark continued. I think you've just gotten really good at moving forward anyway, while still asking the next question underneath everything you do. That's not confidence. That's something else. I don't think I have a word for it. Bruce almost smiled. Curiosity, maybe. Maybe, Clark agreed, but it feels bigger than that. It feels like you never let yourself believe you've arrived anywhere. Like the whole world is still a mystery to you, even after everything you've already solved. Bruce remembers not answering that night, not because he disagreed, but because Clark had, in his simple, earnest way, said something Bruce had never quite put into words for himself, despite having lived by its truth for decades. The world was, and remains, a mystery to him, every single day. He suspects that is precisely why he has never stopped trying to understand it. Bruce returns the napkin carefully to its sleeve, folding the memory gently back into its place among everything else, and continues deeper into the room, toward the oldest shelves at the very back, the ones he has for years deliberately avoided. At the very back of the room of unanswered questions stands a cabinet unlike any other, older than the rest, its wood darker, its brass fittings tarnished almost black with age. Bruce has walked past this cabinet countless times over the years, each time slowing his steps slightly, each time choosing not to open it. Tonight, for reasons he does not fully articulate even to himself, he stops in front of it fully. He has avoided this cabinet for longer than he has avoided almost anything else in his life. Not because it holds a mystery he failed to solve, not because it holds evidence of some painful case. It holds something far more difficult to face than any villain's crime. It holds himself. Bruce reaches out and unlatches the small brass clasp, the hinge groaning softly with disuse. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, is a single object, a child's notebook. Its cover, a simple, cheap cardboard, the words, "My Detective Book," written across the front in careful, uneven 8-year-old handwriting, decorated with a crudely drawn magnifying glass. He lifts it with both hands, the way one might lift something fragile enough to shatter under too much pressure. The pages inside are exactly as he remembers them, filled with a child's earnest, imperfect attempt to understand the world through investigation. Sketches of shoe prints found in the manor gardens, labelled with guesses about who might have made them. A case about a missing kitchen spoon, solved, according to the confident scrawl at the bottom of the page, by asking Alfred nicely, because Alfred always knows. Bruce turns the pages slowly, each one a small window into a version of himself that existed before grief, before Gotham, before the cowl. A boy who simply loved the feeling of a mystery waiting to be understood. One page shows a detailed, if wildly inaccurate, diagram of how fingerprints work, copied from an encyclopedia with careful, childish precision. Another shows a list titled "Questions I Don't Know Yet," containing entries as varied as "Why does the moon change shape?" and "How do detectives know when someone is lying?" And, near the bottom of the page, in slightly smaller handwriting, as though the question had occurred to him quietly, almost privately, "Why did the bad man hurt my parents?" Bruce sits with that page for a long moment, the gaslight flickering gently across the paper, the distant waterfall the only sound in the room. He does not remember writing that question, but he recognizes immediately and completely the particular ache behind it. The ache of a child trying to apply the only tool he had curiosity, to a wound that curiosity alone could never fully heal. He turns the page and finds, several pages later, an answer of sorts. Not a real answer, but the earnest, searching attempt of a grieving boy trying to make sense of senselessness. Maybe bad things happen because nobody was watching close enough. Maybe if I learn to watch everything closely, always, I can stop it from happening to someone else. Bruce closes his eyes briefly. He understands, reading this now as a grown man who has spent decades keeping that very promise, that this notebook is not simply the beginning of Batman's methodology, it is the beginning of Batman's purpose. Long before he trained under any master, long before he built any piece of technology, long before he ever put on a cowl, an 8-year-old boy decided that attention, patience, and the refusal to look away were forms of love, forms of protection. The only kind of protection he had left to offer a world that had already taken so much from him. He remembers now something he has not thought of in years. A memory of Alfred finding him with this very notebook, weeks after the funeral, sitting alone on the floor of his room, surrounded by scattered clues about the shoe print in the garden, utterly absorbed in the investigation. Alfred had knelt down beside him, not asking him to stop, not gently redirecting him toward grief counseling or distraction, but simply asking with genuine interest, "And what have you discovered so far, Master Bruce?" Bruce had looked up at him and said, with the complete seriousness only a child can summon, "I think if I keep asking questions, I'll understand everything eventually, and then nothing bad will ever surprise me again." Alfred had not corrected him. He had simply nodded and sat down on the floor beside him and helped him look for more clues. Bruce understands now, decades later, that Alfred knew even then the boy's theory was, in its way, beautifully incorrect. The world would go on surprising him, painfully, for the rest of his life, no matter how much he learned. But Alfred also understood something perhaps more important, that the act of asking questions, of refusing to accept the world's cruelty as unexplainable and random, was itself a form of healing. Not a solution, a practice. Bruce turns to the final page of the child's notebook. Near the bottom, beneath a rough, hopeful sketch of a magnifying glass held up toward a drawing of the moon, is a single sentence, written larger than any other in the entire book, as though the boy who wrote it wanted very badly to believe it completely. "I don't want to become the smartest man in the world. I only want to understand it." Bruce sits with this sentence for a long time. He thinks of every case in this room, every mystery that defeated him, every wrong theory, every moment another mind, Alfred's, Superman's, even Lex Luthor's, revealed something Bruce could not have seen alone. He thinks of Karigi teaching him to withhold judgment, of the 4 seconds of silence that once solved a kidnapping, of 40 pages of wrong answers leading eventually to one right one. None of it, he realizes now, was ever truly about becoming the smartest man alive. It was always simply about this. A boy on a bedroom floor, unwilling to stop asking why, because asking why was the only thing that made an unbearable world feel, even slightly, survivable. Bruce closes the notebook gently, the way one closes something sacred, and holds it against his chest for a long moment in the quiet amber light. Then, carefully, reverently, he returns it to its place inside the old wooden cabinet and closes the door. Not to forget it, but because some things are meant to be visited rather than lived inside permanently. He rises slowly and turns to look at the room around him. Every shelf, every notebook, every case file, every small failure and quiet lesson that built one unanswered question at a time, the mind capable of standing in this room tonight. It is time, he realizes, to close it for the night. Bruce moves slowly back through the room, retracing his steps in reverse, returning each item he has touched tonight to precisely the place it belongs, the way he has always insisted on doing in this room more than anywhere else in his life. He returns the cracked Justice League communicator to its case near the center of the room. He places Alfred's old photograph back into its small wooden box, allowing himself one more glance at Alfred's kind, patient face before closing the lid. He returns the folded napkin to its protective sleeve, tucking it back among the shelf of quiet watchtower memories. He slides Lex Luthor's thick folder back into place between the two unmarked evidence boxes, its weight settling exactly where it has rested for years. One by one, the room returns to the stillness it held before he entered. Every object exactly where it belongs, every unanswered question resting quietly in its place, waiting, as it always has, not to be solved, but simply to be remembered. Bruce pauses near the center of the room, looking around at everything he has touched tonight. He thinks about how strange this room would seem to anyone who did not understand him. An entire chamber devoted not to triumph, but to failure. Not to certainty, but to doubt. A museum, in its way, of every moment Bruce Wayne was forced to admit he did not yet understand something completely. And yet, he realizes, standing here in the amber gaslight with the distant waterfall echoing softly through the stone, this room may be the truest measure of everything he has ever built. Gotham remembers Batman as a symbol of certainty, an unshakable, unstoppable force of intellect and will, always 3 steps ahead, always calm amid chaos. But intelligence, Bruce understands now more clearly than he ever has before, was never really about certainty at all. It was about humility, disguised as confidence. It was about the willingness to be wrong 40 times in a notebook before being right once. It was about listening to Alfred, and to Carigi, and to Clark, and to a frightened uncle's 4 seconds of silence, and understanding that every one of those moments taught him more than his own mind ever could have taught him alone. Intelligence, Bruce thinks, standing quietly among the shelves, was never about having the answers. It was about refusing, again and again, patiently, humbly, endlessly, to settle for the first one. He walks toward the gas lamp near the entrance and reaches up to lower the flame, the amber light dimming slowly across the room, shadows lengthening gently across the shelves, folding the room of unanswered questions back into darkness for another season of silence. Before the light fully fades, Bruce glances once more toward the back of the room, toward the old wooden cabinet holding a child's notebook, its brass clasp now closed, its secret returned to rest. He does not need to open it again tonight. He knows now what it holds. He has always known, somewhere beneath the surface of everything he built afterward. Tonight, he simply allowed himself to remember it clearly. The flame lowers to a soft ember, then to nothing. Bruce steps out of the room of unanswered questions and closes the heavy steel door behind him with a quiet, patient sound, the lock clicking gently into place. The Batcave stretches out before him once more, monitors glowing faintly blue in the darkness, the waterfall rushing steadily beyond the stone, the familiar hum of the Bat computer waiting patiently in sleep mode. He walks toward it slowly, his footsteps echoing softly across the polished stone floor, carrying with him quietly, invisibly, every lesson the room has just returned to him. Morning arrives slowly over Wayne Manor. Above the cave, sunlight begins to press gently against the edges of Gotham's skyline, filtering down through the manor's hidden entrances in thin, pale beams that catch the drifting dust suspended in the cave's still air. Bruce sits at the main workstation, cowl removed, gloves resting beside an untouched, long-cooled cup of coffee. The Bat-computer's screen glows faintly, cycling slowly into its dormant morning state, the endless data of Gotham's night finally quieting into rest. He has not slept. He rarely does on nights like this. But he does not feel the exhaustion he might expect. Instead, there is something quieter settled into him. Not triumph, not relief, but a kind of gentle clarity. The particular stillness that comes after finally sitting with something you have avoided for a long time. Bruce glances toward the far wall of the cave, toward the hidden steel door disguised behind the decoy shelf, now closed, now locked. The room of unanswered questions resting quietly behind it until he chooses to return. He thinks of the plaque hanging above its farthest shelf. Every unanswered question makes the next answer possible. He thinks of Kirigi, teaching a young man to see the world instead of merely looking at it. He thinks of Alfred, quietly solving a mystery before Bruce even began investigating it, and never once making him feel small for it. He thinks of Clark, asking a question aboard the watchtower that Bruce still doesn't have a complete answer for, and probably never will. He thinks, finally, of a boy on a bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered clues about a shoe print in the garden, promising himself that attention and patience were forms of protection the world could never fully take away from him. Bruce rises slowly from the workstation, gathering his gloves, glancing once more at the cave around him, the trophies, the case files, the giant mounted penny catching the earliest light of morning, the waterfall continuing its endless, patient rush into darkness. Pinned to a small corkboard near the edge of the workstation, among reminders and half-finished notes, is a single index card Bruce placed there years ago and has never removed. It reads only, "Why?" No case name, no context, no answer written beneath it. Bruce looks at it for a long moment in the growing morning light and allows himself, quietly, to smile. Some mysteries, he thinks, are not meant to be solved quickly. Some are meant to be lived with, returned to, carried gently across years and decades, revisited each time a little more of the answer reveals itself, and a little more of the question deepens. He does not need to solve everything tonight. He does not need to solve everything ever. The world will keep offering him new questions for as long as he is willing to keep asking them. And Bruce has long since made his peace with that endlessness. Has, in fact, come to find something like comfort in it. He turns from the workstation, walks past the cases, past the trophies, past the long shelves of solved and unsolved mysteries alike, toward the narrow stone stairway leading up out of the cave, toward the manor, toward the ordinary daylight world where he is simply Bruce Wayne, a man who never quite stopped being the curious, grieving boy who once believed that watching closely enough could hold back the darkness. Sunlight spills gently across the cave floor as the hidden door slides open above him. Bruce Wayne climbs the stairs slowly, leaving the Bat-computer humming softly to itself in sleep, leaving the room of unanswered questions locked and waiting in the dark behind him. carrying forward, as he always has, as he always will, not the certainty of having understood the world completely, only the quiet, enduring wonder of continuing to try. He steps out into the rising light above Gotham, and somewhere behind him, deep within the stone, the cave falls gently, peacefully still.